G'day. It's been a while, but I have returned from Broken Hill, my 6-week teaching practicum over in Broken Hill. It was fantastic. I'm going to make another video that's a bit more in depth where I kind of sit in front of the camera, have a bit of a chat about some of the things I learnt there. But for this video, I'm just going to give you guys a look at my commute to the school every day. And I ended up having to find my own accommodation and everything with another student who was going on prac in Broken Hill, and the only place we could find was the complete opposite end of town to the school. Didn't really matter because Broken Hill is only like 5k's by 5k's or something like that. It's a pretty small town. So I basically rode, and the school is on the northern end of the town. So this commute traverses from essentially almost the southernmost point, the kind of southwesterly-most point of town, to the northeasterly-most point of town. 90%, pretty much exactly 90% of that commute, I calculated it, time-wise, I don't know about distance-wise, but time-wise about 90% of that commute was spent on bike lanes. Painted bike lanes, I should say, I should make that clear, but bike lanes nonetheless, which I thought was pretty crazy. It wasn't something I was expecting going into Broken Hill. But here I am on a bike lane, and the roads as well, even where there aren't bike lanes, for the most part, are wide enough that the 1 meter overtaking rule isn't really a problem. And people, because there's no traffic, I guess, aren't really in the same rush as they are in Sydney, so there's less impatience and things like that. The only thing that does kind of make riding a bike a bit scary in Broken Hill, I found, was that everyone drives cars that are about twice as big as they need to be, citing kangaroos as the excuse, but quite frankly, you can put bull bars on something that isn't a Dodge Ram. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But generally, Broken Hill was safe enough to ride through that when I turned up to school. Actually, I would turn up before the students, but when I walked past the bike cage at the school I was doing prac at lunchtime, it was chockers. It was full. I never counted the bikes in there, but I'd estimate, at a very, very low estimate, 20 to 30, probably a lot more. So it's safe enough that a lot of kids felt like they could ride. Although when I mentioned I rode from South Broken Hill, a lot of them seemed pretty surprised by that. And I'll, once I get to the road in between North and South Broken Hill, you might see why. It turns into a bit more of a highway situation, and it's a little bit sketchier than just riding on the kind of residential streets where the speed limit's 50 kilometers an hour. Not that everyone does 50 kilometers an hour. The big cars and the fast speeds are kind of the two things that impacted, me feeling safe while I was riding in Broken Hill. But I feel like they were more than compensated for by the tiny amount of traffic. And to be honest, I think the tiny amount of traffic leading to biking being safer, that is the biggest lesson that, councils in Sydney or all around anywhere in the world, to be honest, who are trying to encourage active transport, that's the takeaway. Mostly it comes down to calming traffic. So, I'm turning left here towards the road that'll take me to the main part of Broken Hill from the south part of Broken Hill. In front of me right there is not a regular hill, it's not a natural mountain or anything like that, or a little plateau. What it is the accumulation of rubble from the open cut mine that's in the middle of town, which is pretty fascinating. Like, it is just this, they call it the Line of Lode, L-O-D-E. It's this giant pile of rubble, giant pile of mining detritus in the middle of town. This is the only kind of sketchy part, or the sketchiest part of the ride. It's a bit hard to see with the sun just glaring right into the GoPro's lens. But this shoulder of the road is actually almost as wide as the road lane itself, which is nice. So it's, even though the only thing protecting me from these 60km/h cars is a line of paint, it's easy for that 1 meter rule to be obeyed. But there are some moments where the road narrows down. And I'll show a brief clip now of me riding back on the other side of the road, because that actually does get quite sketchy because the shoulder isn't wide enough there, and they had to actually build a bike lane, but they didn't do a good job of it. But they tried. You could use it on a mountain bike, but I wasn't riding a mountain bike. Alrighty, so here I am coming the other way, and my problems really began around this point where there's some kind of industrial area trucks coming in and out of, so that's why the road's kind of a bit dodgy. And then the bike lane changes from the wide shoulder of the road to, I guess, gravel. And then if you look over to the left, there's a kind of gutter for storm water. And some little tree plantings, and then to the left of that, there's gravel, and that's the bike lane. You can see I'm indicating to the left there. So that continues on further up the road, but I turned left here earlier than I would have to go up this little side street. So if you're anything like me, you might be watching this video thinking, how and why did these bike lanes actually get built? And I actually tried to investigate that a bit. There is a 2019 document that is 188 pages, and it's basically Broken Hill's active travel plan. And from what I could see, none of that plan's recommendations had actually been implemented in 2023 when I was there. And I suspect that a lot of that might have been because in the local government elections, I think they were in 2021 or something like that, a new guy was brought in, and he, from all accounts, is not a spectacular mayor, certainly not a progressive mayor. So maybe those plans kind of are dead in the water now. The plans they came up with in 2019, the new mayor might not be implementing them. But it wasn't from those 2019 plans that these bike lanes came. It was much earlier than that. Within those 2019 active transport plans, which are so fantastic and comprehensive, and they have really good recommendations, even if those recommendations are buried in 188 pages of just random stuff. It's a lot to read through. But actually, those active transport plans referenced a 2013 active transport plan, which I couldn't find. All I found was an ABC article talking about it, saying, well, part of it is they've got these what did they call them? They're not bindies. They are like 3-corner jacks, and they are bindies on steroids, right? They puncture tires. Think of it like bindies that puncture tires. Luckily, I didn't get a flat tire. My housemate did get a flat tire on her bike. We don't know if it was a let me bring up the article again. I keep thinking 3-corner jack that did it or not. We didn't find a 3-corner jack at the scene of the crime, but that was basically the only trace of this 2013 thing I could find. But I'm going to assume that sometime between 2013 and 2019 is when these were implemented, and it was in an effort to increase active transport patronage. But I don't know what state government initiative that would have been linked to, and I think it's important that there is state government funding available for active transport, so that there is money and incentive for these kind of regional communities to do this as well. But I think the plan also acknowledged that with less public transport and things like that, there is a real, and with school attendance being a problem out here as well, there is a real reason to make it as easy and enjoyable and safe as possible for kids to ride to school as well. So you may have noticed that I just passed over some train tracks. I think it was only once on my way to school that I actually had to wait for a train to go past on those tracks. A freight train, there are heaps of freight trains going kind of in and out of the mines. And I actually, when I was on my way to go to the top of the Line of Lode, because you can do that, I biked up to the top of it on this e-bike. I ended up waiting for like a massive long freight train to go by. I got a bit of footage of it. It was pretty groovy. There was actually another guy waiting to bike across the tracks as well. I also saw, like, when I was up there on the weekend with my family, I saw like a bunch of kids. They were like, it was like Stranger Things, right? You know, it was like the 80s. They were all riding around on their bike, just hanging out, doing whatever they wanted on the weekend. And they all went to the top of the Line of Lode and then rode back down, and they were having a great time. It was good to see. But yeah, that was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see all the freight trains, because when you see them, you just really appreciate how effective they are, like just how much they can do. Like the massive trains of like cars just full of rocks and stuff they can carry. It's insane. And then driving back with my parents, I caught the train here and then I drove back, and we kind of stopped at a few towns along the way, saw the sights. But driving back, you're like, man, you're like, why is there not freight rail to every town everywhere in New South Wales? Because when you see the kind of stuff they have to do to get the things that you would normally take on freight trains around by truck, like there are these oversized road trains, and they have a little van out the front with this, the flashing lights and a big sign saying road train ahead on its way. And then they basically, what happens, it's like this kind of just like a normal 2-lane highway, one way each way. You have to pull over onto the shoulder of the road, slow down from 110 or whatever you're doing, pull over on the shoulder of the road, and this massive hulking truck that's a lane and a half wide just tears through, and I saw a bunch of those in between Wilcannia and Cobar, and then at around Cobar, that's when you get rail running parallel to the road again. And suddenly there were none of those. There were still road trains, but there were none of those like lane and a half wide road trains that needed the van escort. So I don't know, man. I feel like we need more freight rail all around Australia, because I don't know, I don't like to think about just how easy it would be for someone driving to be just taken out by one of those road trains. But that's why they have those escorts and everything like that. But it's just not, it feels like such a sketchy solution. Another thing that I saw quite frequently while I was in Broken Hill, people in mobility scooters using the bike lanes. And I thought that was really good, because Broken Hill has really, really high curbs, because most of the town doesn't have a floodwater management system. So they have really high curbs instead to stop water going under your doors and everything like that. But yeah, that has a side effect of making the town less accessible. And so what I saw was a lot of people with mobility scooters using the bike lanes. Most of my commutes back home, I'd see at least one person on a mobility scooter in the bike lane. So, and I know a lot of these arguments are made in bad faith, but I think it's like even when they are made in bad faith. It's a valid concern to have, like, you know, people talking about, well, what about people who need cars because they can't ride a bike? But I think, and that's why, you know, traffic calming is important, yes, but you've got to maintain access for cars just as long as it's at a safe speed and at a safe traffic volume, right? But the other side of the coin for access for people with disabilities is a lot of these people with disabilities are going to be old people with bad eyesight who can't drive, or people who get around in mobility scooters who will be much better off using the bike lanes, which don't have ramps up and down, than they will be using footpaths with ramps and things like that. There's also the fact that a person riding a bike is much less dangerous to a person with a disability on foot, say for example a low vision person walking with the aid of a stick crossing a street, than someone in a car is, and that's because of speed and that's because of mass, right? But we kind of hear this talked about a lot in terms of accessibility. And yeah, I've seen people ride around in recumbent bikes and things like that, which is an accessibility modification. But even though Sydney has a lot of bike lanes, I actually don't know if I've ever seen someone on a mobility scooter use those bike lanes. And I guess that might be because with a lot of Sydney's bike lanes, they're not very connected and they don't form a comprehensive route, which is the same in Broken Hill, but the difference in Sydney is that a bike lane that's not part of a comprehensive route is going to spit you out into dangerous fast traffic, whereas that's not necessarily going to be the case in Broken Hill. Before we go, I'd just like to thank my monthly Ko-fi supporters: Axwalia, Abraham N, Building Beautifully, and Lucas. So thank you all so much. If you would like to support my YouTube channel, well, I'm going to take a guess that it's probably because you like active transport, you like public transport, things like that. So if you've got a bit of spare time and money, send it to organisations such as Better Streets, Bicycle New South Wales, Walk Sydney, or the equivalent organisations in your area. If you've got a bit of money left over after that, you can become a monthly member on Ko-fi and you'll get early access to videos and behind the scenes pictures and things like that.